Warami, hello, and welcome to this October edition of the Australia-New Zealand Women's Declaration International webinar. My name is Janet Fraser, and I'm the convener of the Feminist Legal Clinic in Exile. Our principal solicitor, Anna Kerr, is doing tech with Kate Williamson, so thanks to those women. I live and work on Darug and Gundungurra country. Wherever you're coming from this evening, we pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations across the continent, and bid any First Nations women welcome tonight. Welcome, everyone. Many of our sisters will be meeting tonight for Reclaim the Night. And I thought I would share this. This is a poster from Aotearoa, New Zealand, for our sisters across the pond there. Reclaim the Night began in 1978 in Australia, and I'm sure many of us have been involved in the organising or speaking at or all of that. So I'd like to pay tribute to the women who are out there marching tonight. And now to introduce our excellent panel for this evening. Kit Kowalski is a Sydney mother of two and full-time IT specialist. She's been looking closely at the ACON Pride in Diversity and Australian Workplace Equality Index schemes for a bit over a year, though it feels much longer. You may have seen some evidence of this splendid work recently on That Media Watch episode. She writes a gender-critical blog at ladykitkowalski.wordpress.com. Anne Cuddy lives on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. She grew up in Queensland, and while having a loving family, sought independence young. Benefited as a post-war child from reforms that others fought for, and was the first of her people to have a tertiary education. She was a teenager when the second wave of feminism was cresting in Australia and became infected after reading The Female Eunuch at 14. She simultaneously thought there might be other gays in New York and resolved to save up and go there one day. She is a lifelong radical feminist and trade unionist, both in spear-carrying capacity. She's made herself useful as a kitchen hand, cleaner, bus driver, postie, and public servant. Her preoccupations include, but I suspect are not limited to, heterodox economics, modern monetary theory as a shovel-ready framework for change, and the hydra-headed abominations of the gender cult. She identifies as a pain in the arse. Karen Smith is here representing the Women's Action Alliance Canberra, WAC. WAC is a Canberra-based female-only women's liberation group with radical feminist roots that fights for women's and girls' sex-based rights. WAC operates on Ngunnawal and Nungaburri land. Initially launched in May 2018, WAC started out primarily as a consciousness-raising group, but relaunched in October 2021, this time explicitly stating that they are gender critical, that sex is a biological reality that has material consequences for the social, cultural, medical, economic, and political lives of women and girls. So I'd like to hand over to Karen, who's going to take it away as our first speaker. Over to you, Karen.
I'm going to give a bit of an update on our WAC activities, and thanks to Janet for giving us this opportunity to do that. My name is Karen. I represent the Women's Action Alliance Canberra. We're called WAC. I've called this talk Going to Parliament and Going Guerrilla, Practivism and Getting It Done. I'm not going to have time to talk about going guerrilla. Maybe some other time we can do that. I'm going to give an update on a couple of protests that we've run, some letter writing we've been doing, meetings we've had with Active Watchful Waiting Australasia and the Australian Christian Lobby. I'll give an update on some organising we're doing to get Kira Bell a group meeting at Parliament House with interested parties. And like I say, I was going to talk about some guerrilla activism we've noticed around town, but sadly I won't have time to get to that today. Let's start with one of our protests. WAC protested the ABC's non-reporting of the Tavistock. This was off the back of the Media Watch episode that dealt with this matter in late August. We were taking advantage of that, so we thought we'd hopped down to the ABC in Canberra, which helpfully is at an intersection on the main drag. We set up there on a Saturday morning from 11 a.m, spent a couple of hours there. We were mostly working on public land. This is us just setting up. When we first arrived, you can see the intersection. We were mostly on public land, but occasionally we had the odd incursion onto ABC property. One of the advantages of setting up at the intersection is that lots of people, of course, are stopping in their cars, especially late on a Saturday morning, and people were able to read the placards from their cars. We got lots of honks and support and thumbs up from people in their cars. We only got abuse from maybe 3 or 4 cars, tellingly, all with young people in them who told us to fuck off. There were some passers-by who stopped to talk, but it's not a main thoroughfare here. It is for vehicles, but not for passers-by. You'll see here that not everyone's happy to have their face out there. At WAC, we understand that, so we encourage sisters, if they're not really comfortable with that, wear face masks on such a protest, wear a face mask, wear hats, sunglasses, coats, whatever they feel comfortable with. But you can see our protest here really was focused around the Tavistock and the ABC's not impartial reporting of the Tavistock. One thing that was rather splendid was that the ABC spoke to us. And I think that might be a first. They talking to feminists in this area. You can see here an ABC employee who came down to take some photos and gather intel on us. I think she thought that was a clever thing to do, but we were quite happy to do that. We knew exactly what was going on. So we gave her handouts. We're all with our details on them, so they've clocked us, they know who we are. We had a little chat with her. We mentioned editorial policies, ABC editorial policies 2 and 4, stuff to do with impartiality and reporting the facts. And the employee said, "I report the facts and I'm impartial, as are my colleagues. That's the only comment I'll give." I don't know if that's weird or not, but that's what she said. Towards the end of the protest, we were a couple of hours, we were all feeling quite relaxed and happy, so we were brave enough to go up to the front door of the ABC. After that, of course, the sisters headed to the pub. We took our little mini-me's, which are very helpful because some sisters don't want their faces out there, in which case we can take the mini-me's around and protest anywhere we want. That was the Saturday. Then, of course, there was ABC's Q&A, which was coming up on Monday night. In anticipation of that, with the lovely Hannah Moutsey and other interesting people, in anticipation of that, of course, on the Monday after the Saturday that we protested the Tavistock and the ABC, we had to go back to the ABC and do it all again. But just in case Monday night turned out to be a disaster, which it did. So luckily we went back Monday morning, took another couple of photos. A little hard to rally the troops on a Monday, but we were able to then get that out there on Tuesday morning after the Monday night disaster of Q&A. Another protest that we held was at the ACT Magistrates Court. We did this on September the 22nd, which was a public holiday, which was for the Queen's death, observance of that. We discussed the ethics of doing that, but we figured we'd go ahead. At this protest, we weren't aiming for foot traffic going past. We were aiming to take photos and awareness raising. I'll talk a little bit about the issue in a minute, the specific issue we were protesting. But in doing it this way on a public holiday, it also meant that we didn't have to advise the sheriff that we were outside, the sheriff of the court. We didn't have to tell them that we were outside because, of course, with courts, you can only protest in certain places. At the ACT Magistrates Court, it's something like the black paved area in front of the bollards, something like that. You can't protest outside the family or children's court. So these are all things that we have to be aware of when running these kind of wactions. So what were we protesting? What we were doing was we were questioning the court's reasoning for its decision to release a 27-year-old male charged with 72 sexual offences related to child sexual assault on bail. That's what we were questioning. He's alleged to have sexually abused his 2 younger sisters, who were between 5 and 12 years old. This was over a period of 7 years. He pleaded not guilty to all charges, which include incest, assault, choking, sexual assault, and acts of indecency. He was reportedly granted bail in a hearing due to concerns that he would be remanded in the male section of the Alexander McConaughey Centre. That's the AMC. It's the only correctional centre in the ACT. Presiding Magistrate Jane Campbell determined that detaining the defendant in the male section of the correctional centre would be unsuitable, given he identifies as a woman. And she stated, "To my grand astonishment, I am told she," our emphasis, "would be held in the male section of the AMC, and that would clearly not be in the interest of a person who identifies as a woman." So, yes, Presiding Magistrate Jane Campbell was grandly astonished. We were grandly fucking astonished too, because we figured that this could be a dire forewarning or a precedent, if you will, a position that the court may take in future in relation to any male who says that he's a woman. And that would be that such men should not be housed in a men's facility. And we were grandly fucking astonished to think that this could very well lead to a man's being housed with women if found guilty. So that was a broader issue that we were protesting. How did we do it? Well, no great secrets here. We made our own placards. We were really workshopping the theme of the courts here: caution, judge, women, object. The jury is not out, sex matters. Take the stand for women. We plead for women. Don't lower the bar for men. Blah blah blah. Acquit your duty. Essentially, I mean, these are great placards. Essentially, I'd watched an episode of Rumpole the night before. So this was all in my mind, some of these terrific slogans. We also invited to this protest our men's auxiliary. Sorry to show men on this thing, but there you go. We invited our men's auxiliary. We only invite them if they're going to be useful, in this case, taking photos, putting their legs under placards, that sort of thing. If any sister doesn't want a man at any of our organised events, then he's removed. No questions, no argument, no judgment. But after events are for sisters only, and we went out for lunch. So really, men have a limited utility to us in WAC. Just some photos from the WACtion. You'll see we had a good number of women there. Lovely photo opportunity. It was fairly relaxed kind of morning. At some point we did, this is all good stuff for Twitter, right? At some point we did read out some speeches. We started off by reading out some so-called, what we called them, telegrams of support. They're basically DMs and emails from people like the lady Kit Kowalski, who wished us all the best, as did Janet Fraser. We read those out. We read out messages from Single Sex Prisons WA and Anna McCormack. Like I say, we gave some speeches. We also read out, I love this photo because you can see the nice power fist there from one of the sisters. We also read out a speech on behalf of Jess Williams, the founder of Single Sex Prisons Australia. She was generous enough to write something for us that we could then read out on her behalf with her name. Just some of the protest actions. This photo I want to show because this is interesting. You'll see there I've highlighted one of the sisters is holding a placard, which we've blacked out. We just thought that that placard said trans women are men, which is quite obvious. But in the context of people's employment and things like that, we just thought that might be a bridge too far in identifying sisters and perhaps putting them at risk in terms of security for employment. Other things we've been doing are writing letters. After the Media Watch segment on ACON, we thought we'd jump in on that and write a letter to the Minister for Communications, Michelle Rowland. We CC'd Claire Chandler and Katie Gallagher, who's the Minister for Women. We got back a response from Claire Chandler. That was great, saying, yes, go for it. Thanks for all your work. We got an email back from a lackey at Gallagher's office, a she, her, hers lackey. So, not really expecting much to happen there. One thing we learnt through this, and I know Kit's going to mention this as well, but for various reasons, we had to send this letter to the minister because the sister who wrote it doesn't actually reside in the ACT. She doesn't vote in any of the ACT electorates. It is a better way to get a response from about an issue is to send your letter to your local member, your local representative, not direct to the minister. Send it to your local member. and then ask your local member to raise it with the minister. That makes it then a political query between colleagues and not just a query from some random in the community that can be shopped off to the department. So your member should take it to the minister should answer the member, and the member should come back to you, and this is regardless of which side of politics they are on, same side or opposite sides. I'm just going to put up a slide now if anyone wants to write down who we are and get in touch, they can. I'll just put this up here while I talk about a couple of other things we've been involved with or that we know about. You may have heard about the ROGD mums who were here in Canberra to talk to parliamentarians this week. They were a party of 4. They went to Parliament House for some meetings with various parliamentarians, organised, I think, by Karina and Wendy Francis of the Australian Christian Lobby. I believe they were promised support for an inquiry into gender-affirming practices for young people by the Libs and the Nats and One Nation members. Members from the ALP were asking for more information about what was going on. Some were surprised, some were sceptical, but, possibly able to be piqued. We also met with one of the mothers from Active Watchful Waiting Australasia. That was nice to touch base there. But that's Kat's and Wendy's thing, so they can talk about that in their own spheres if they like, of course. We're also in the next week or so, WAC is going to meet with Dr. Mike Freelander, MP, ALP, House of Reps. He's the chair of the Standing Committee on Health, Aged Care and Sport. That will be on 8th of November. Wendy Francis of the Australian Christian Lobby has organised this for us. The way we figure it, and we've had discussions between Wendy and myself, we're useful to each other. We recognise we're not going to agree on everything. She knows that we're useful to her because it's good to have this seen as not just a religious issue around the traps, and she's useful to us because she can get us meetings up the hill. One of the things she is helping with in terms of the up the hill Parliament House venue is the Kira Bell visit. If you don't know, Kira Bell is coming to Australia, I believe, between the 21st of November and the 16th of December. She'll be heading to Tasmania, Canberra, New South Wales, South Australia, Queensland. She's here to give evidence at the Lyle Shelton case where he's being taken to court by some drag queens. Go and, Google that yourself if you want. But what WAC's going to do is we're contacting national medical associations, child welfare bodies, school principals associations, all those relevant kind of charities as well, asking if they want to meet with Kira when she's in Canberra. What we're offering them is to meet with her at Parliament House, hopefully in the Speaker's rooms, the Speaker of the House in his rooms. That would be nice. It's a bit of an inducement. The objective is not to shop Kira around to the already converted. Our understanding is that she doesn't want that either. What we want is to see if we can pique or guilt those who should be protecting children and those engaged in child safeguarding, where WAC is well aware that people mostly don't care about women. So the issues that affect women with all of this business don't matter. So a large strategic focus for us is children. In the last set of updates, perhaps we've re-WACtivated our blog. So if you go to our website, you can read our blog. Like I say, it's where we can be a little freer with some of our commentary than we can on places like Twitter. We're trying to get a sister on the ACT Ministerial Advisory Council on Women. We don't know if it would be smart to say she's from WAC or if we just try to get her on as an individual. We're still strategising that one. Sisters have been doing letter writing around the Magistrates Court issue around so-called gender-specific swim times at ACT public pools. We want clarification on what gender-specific means. We've contacted Diana Kenny, asking her if she would be kind enough to share her freedom of information stuff, how she's gone about gathering that for her data. And I think there was a lesson in that. We thought, oh gosh, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Let's just see if Diana will share her stuff with us. And bang, she did. So just ask, they can only say no. Diana's been very generous in sharing that with us. So we've got a starting point there to get similar data in the ACT if we can. How do we keep in touch with each other? We have a WAC chat in WhatsApp. That's the spot where sisters go in just to share what they've found, but also it's where we organise, where we can say who's available to do this and that. So The WAC chat in WhatsApp is very active and wactive and wonderful. We also have face-to-face meetings. We socialise. It's all really important to WAC. It's, I think, how we can mobilise, get sisters together, how we can do things together. If we've got enough numbers, we don't all have to be there, right? We've got enough numbers. It looks as though we've always got a few bods that we can shop around. That's us. We're the Women's Action Alliance Canberra. Our motto is let's get it done. That's what we're trying to do, trying to be practical about a few things. If there's any questions, we'd be happy to take them at the end. Thanks so much.
And now I'd like to give the floor to Kit Kowalski. Kit.
So hi everyone, I'm Kit Kowalski and I'm going to be talking about ACON and the ABC. Not in the way I usually talk about ACON and the ABC. This time I'm actually going to be talking about Media Watch episode 35, ACON and the ABC, subtitle, Paul Barry Pokes the Bear. So Monday, 17th of October, Media Watch did the unthinkable. They presented a 15-minute spot on the ABC's relationship with ACON. They used data that was publicly available on a website called ACON Exposed. And it was significant for a number of reasons. Primarily, they broke the silence. They broke the spell around no debate. They named ACON as a key player in the gender identity movement. They linked them strongly to Stonewall and referred to the Nolan Report on Stonewall Diversity Champions and the BBC. Significantly, they referred to key hard evidence of the money, the time, the effort being spent to participate in ACON's AWEI scheme. And they had evidence of ACON's influence over ABC editorial policy and content. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of depth analysing the article, but I will point you to a fantastic piece which is on the Women's Cooee website called Auntie, Review Your Relationship with ACON. I did just want to give a little bit of the background as to how the episode came about. So as often with these things, when they're happening, you get, they talk to a lot of different people and you really don't get a full picture. So I've spoken to a number of people who were involved in putting the episode together. And it really does look like it was driven by the Media Watch team. And in my opinion, I think that we just reached a critical mass of awareness within the ABC that there is a debate going on, that we're not being heard, and that there's actually critical consequences to ignoring this debate. Now, I know we might think of the ABC as being aware of these issues because they're constantly putting out content that is actively promoting gender identity theory. But within the organisation, it's not homogenous. So there are these pockets of, and I've heard them described as scary young people who are spreading these gender identity theories. And then there's just everybody else who's just getting on with their job and, doing what they need to do. And so, we've got this situation where to us, it looks like they're fully aware of the issues and they're ignoring them. But on the inside, there are people who really don't know what's going on. So in my mind, there has actually, we reached a critical mass of awareness in the ABC. And this has been achieved over time by, for example, protests like we saw WAC doing a protest, or Women's Cooee protesting, or IWD Brisbane Meanjin protesting outside of the ABC, and all of the numerous chalkings that have been taking place outside ABC offices. ABC do take note. They take photographs, they interview the protesters, and they take a pamphlet back. And it probably just goes in a file drawer somewhere. But when we reach that critical tipping point of awareness, they have those materials there on hand to refer to. Same with letter writing. I'm aware of many women writing to the ABC over and over again over a sustained period. In particular, I just want to call out a psychologist, Sandra Perto, who I'm aware of having a rather sustained and in-depth correspondence with Fiona Cameron, who is the ABC's internal ombudswoman. And Sandra has done a valiant effort actually pointing the ombudswoman to resources such as ACON Exposed, such as Women's QE, and sending her, among other things, pictures of AGPs to sort of prove that this is not something that she's just, making up in a moral panic. And those concerns were actually taken on board to some extent. So it is really important, I think, that Media Watch drove the story and that it wasn't spoon-fed by a couple of gender-critical activists. Gender-critical activists did give them information, did give them facts, but they went away, they interviewed people, they looked at the evidence, and they came to the same conclusions. What was a really key turning point was the Pride and Prejudice in Policy Forum that was held in the University of Melbourne. So one of the key strategy points here was that the organisers actually did involve ABC journalists, and a number of things happened. They involved ABC and they involved ACON. ACON dropped out. Some of the ABC participants dropped out and had to be replaced by other ABC participants. They got to see that instead of coming in to join and have a civil debate, trans activists stood outside and tried to disrupt the forum. And they got to see the treatment of some of the ABC participants afterwards, how they were sort of maligned for being anti-trans, for wanting to just simply participate in a public debate. And really importantly, the ABC recorded that session. That recording was brought into the organisation and it was passed around to key journalists. And so we have this one event, and then that is backed up by all of that supplementary information, all those protests, all those letters, all of that correspondence, all of those complaints that were made over time. So this is clearly not just an isolated incident. This is an actual phenomenon, and it was enough to push Media Watch into investigating the story. Something I take away from this is that involving them was a really key strategy point, but just involving them the one time wouldn't have been enough. We still needed to have that sustained effort in bringing up the issues. The journalists that I spoke to at Media Watch and in other news outlets, they say, look, we weren't really aware. We don't know what's going on. It's no one's standing over us, telling us what we can and can't publish. However, we all know that it was an act of bravery for Media Watch to publish the story. And we all know that there was backlash from within the ABC afterwards. And that is how we know that there is control over editorial decisions, because there is an invisible line that they crossed. So published with the story were a statement by ACON, a statement by ABC, and also afterwards, a number of journalists within the ABC actually pushed back, not just on their own personal Twitter timelines, but at least two took to the airwaves during a Radio National broadcast to discuss the Media Watch episode and to really distance themselves from the Media Watch team. So they were using their platform provided to them by the ABC to make comments on how their relationship with ACON doesn't affect editorial content at all. And additionally, the next day after the Media Watch broadcast, there was an emergency meeting held by the ABC Pride Network to decide what to do and how they would all respond. And as a result, there has actually been some unfortunate language being used about Media Watch and about Paul Barry on Twitter and in other places. This is a familiar pattern from the trans activists. When they are questioned, when they are challenged, they push back with personal attacks. So I thought I would use this time to do a bit of a they said, we said, and look at some of the statements that have been made in the wake of the Media Watch broadcast and just challenge them a little bit. So first and foremost, there was the claim. Media Watch said that they got their documents from an anti-trans group, and Benjamin Law and Beverly Wang on ABC Radio National also spent quite a bit of time talking about how Media Watch was basically getting their material from an anti-trans group. So I have 3 challenges to this. Firstly, they're trying to force a confusion between not believing in gender essences, right, as in not supporting transgenderism, and being against transgender individuals or people who claim a transgender identity. So those 2 things are not the same. Secondly, ACON is supposed to actually represent the full LGBTQ spectrum. So claiming that challenging ACON is anti-trans shows their hand a little bit. Okay, it shows that what they're really interested in is the gender identity narrative. Nobody called ACON Exposed an anti-lesbian group, for example. And thirdly, it really doesn't matter whether or not ACON Exposed is an anti-trans group. They present primary data in context. The data was picked up by ABC Media Watch. Media Watch did their own investigation and they came to exactly the same conclusions, that the behaviours showed bias. So, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter who handled the evidence speaks for itself. ACON claims that they are not a public advocacy program. They won't even use the word lobby group. The reason is that their remit and the reason that they receive $13 million from New South Wales Health and an additional $4 million from other government sources per annum, the reason they receive that money is for health advocacy. The reason they can do the Pride and Diversity program is because they link the idea that if you're able to be, quote, your whole self at work, then there will be better health outcomes. And in fact, in their statement, they even make an unsubstantiated claim that the AWEI has helped improve health outcomes for LGBTQ employees, right? They don't even make an attempt to substantiate that. They just say it. It's really important for them not to be seen as a lobby group. However, it's worth noting that a huge part of ACON's workplace programs focus on the development of allyship training. This isn't just advocacy or lobbying, but it's actively recruiting and training grassroots advocates. And this is happening in workplaces, including federal government workplaces across Australia. And if we're thinking about what is the definition of a lobby group, well, there's a broad definition, which is a group formed to influence legislation or policy on a particular issue. Or there's a particular definition used by the Attorney General's Department, which is undertaking communication in an effort to influence government decision-making. So, for example, promoting certain workplace practices and policies across federal government departments. In their statement, the ABC attempt to normalise participation in the AWEI. They start with the "mum, everyone's doing it" defence by stating that 186 employers across all sectors participate in the AWEI. To me, this simply shows us the scale of the issue. It doesn't justify their participation at all, particularly not as the national broadcaster, they have a singular role. in our social and our political landscape. They say that the AWEI simply measures the impact of inclusion activities. Now, this can't be further from the truth. It doesn't measure anything. The AWEI doesn't ask, did you do this? Was it successful? It sets out an exhaustive list of activities and expectations with stringent requirements, and the majority of activities need to be repeated every single year. There is no progression towards maturity. There is point scoring, there is level attainment, and there are awards for high scorers. They also claim that they participate in other diversity benchmarks, which is fine, but we're not talking about those diversity benchmarks. We're talking about the AWEI. Both ACON and the ABC go to lengths to say that ACON has no influence over editorial policies, standards, or content presented by the ABC. This is partially true. ACON doesn't dictate what content the ABC should put forward. In the AWEI submission, it merely leaves a blank space to put forward examples of work that might score a point, that might show your adherence to inclusion and diversity practices. In the AWEI submission, ABC puts forward examples of its work to gain points from ACON. MediaWatch showed actual examples of ACON pointing out what types of content would get them those points. And then that content made it into their submissions and gained points. ACON's stated aim is to use the AWEI to create cultural change in workplaces. And as we might know, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Through the instrument of the AWEI, ABC Pride has created a strong enough culture that when MediaWatch aired their segment, the next day the Pride group had to hold an emergency meeting. They have created a culture where the relationship with ACON is important and must be protected. They felt so threatened by questioning that relationship that they needed to strategize a response. Now remember, when ABC is putting forward examples of their work to get AWEI points, that their work is being the national broadcaster, right? So we talk about ABC Queer, an Instagram channel that promotes pseudoscience. It promotes all sorts of things under the Q umbrella. We talk about an additional channel, ABC Queer Newsletter, the Innies and Outies podcast, ABC acquiring the rights to broadcast the Mardi Gras, and ABC putting forward a number of articles and segments to receive points. When it comes down to deciding whether to produce segment A or segment B, if A comes with points attached, how do we, the public, know that those points didn't tip the balance in favour of that segment? The suggestion of that bias is enough. In their response, ABC pointed out that they aim to report on transgender issues without causing offence or undue stress to vulnerable communities. Now, I think as feminists, we might throw up our hands and say, well, what about the undue stress and offence caused to the other communities when their views are not taken into account? How about the stress and offence caused to women? I'd additionally point out that the ABC has an editorial policy, which is policy number 7, which actually states that in order for them to adequately reflect reality and adequately report on current affairs, this can result in challenging content which may offend some of the audience some of the time. In other words, they have the tools and they have the remit to report fairly on this issue, but they have chosen not to. They have chosen to privilege this group of people and essentially leave other voices out of the discourse. Now, just really quickly, I thought I would cover a couple of things that you can do now that we have broken the spell over no debate. Firstly, Women's Cooee, which is a very important resource when we're talking about ABC bias. Initially, I think, started with Talk About It. So, and Talk About It is actually coming up this weekend. So grab some chalk, write a message, photograph it, put it on social media with the hashtag Talk About It. Bonus points if you do it in front of the ABC building. Secondly, you can write to the ABC. You can support Media Watch and Paul Barry. You can let them know that we want more of this kind of content, and you can let them know that we want Four Corners or the 7:30 report or some other investigative affairs program to dig deeper into this issue, because 15 minutes is not enough. They've barely scratched the surface. You can ask your MP to raise the issue with the Minister for Communications, mentioning the Media Watch segment, that lapses in ABC editorial standards, and call for a Senate inquiry. So this is building on what Karen said earlier. So definitely go and have a chat with your MP. And you can start a conversation. All you have to do is say, hey, did you watch Media Watch? You know, it's a very neutral question. Do you watch Media Watch? And you might follow it up with, do you know that we're in the same scheme? And last of all, don't underestimate the power of a few women tapping away into the night. You know, if you've got something that you're working on, just keep with it and keep going. So ACON Exposed, it was a year in the making. Women's Cooee was also a huge resource. Started back in June 2021, and now that website has photographs from women protesting the ABC all over the country, and it has several articles about ABC bias. And of course, keep writing letters, build networks, work together, and we'll win.
Now, I'd like to bring in Anne. And Anne and I are going to have a bit of a Q&A together. And then Anne, of course, will be joining the other speakers for questions after this. So, hello, Anne. Would you like to introduce yourself and give us some details of your involvement in advocating for women's sex-based rights?
Thank you very much, Janet. My bio pretty well suffices for an introduction. I'm not in any way professionally or in an ongoing basis involved with women's rights. I'm a lifelong feminist, and I bring that with me to everything I'm doing in life, yeah? And I am one of the communities, I hate that word community, but I'm one of those people that are part of the alphabet soup, to which Kit alluded earlier, people who are being completely sidelined and are not being heard at all in relation to women's sex-based rights. So that has sort of woken me from my slumbers and dragged me out of my cave to seek public involvement in this issue.
What made you first realise that transgenderism is a threat to women's rights?
Well, I'd always, in a sense, realised that due to the work of groundbreaking feminists back in the 1990s, people like Sheila Jeffries springs to mind, as does Julie Bindel. So I sort of had an appreciation of the misogyny and the extreme stereotyping that was frequently involved in all the dialogues around that issue. So, and I'd also read that wonderful groundbreaking work by Janice Raymond, written in 1979, all those years ago, The Transsexual Empire. So I have absolutely no excuse for not being aware of this subject. But what happened was I thought it was something very fringe and very arcane. In fact, I wondered why my sisters were spending so much time on what appeared to be, you know, such a very minor subject. And what really made me sit up and notice was when I began to read in the press that governments across the world were beginning to bring in this absolutely bizarre notion of gender self-ID, that it could be written into law that men or women could simply proclaim themselves to be the opposite sex and get that recognised in law. Well, all sorts of alarm bells just started to ring very loudly at that point. But even then, I didn't see it. I still thought, oh, only a couple of places are going to be mad enough to do that. So we can see here why it's difficult for the general public to get an appreciation of the scope and the gravity of this issue and how multi-headed a hydra it indeed is. So I didn't peak once. I've been ascending higher peaks the more I find about this particular subject.
Can you tell us about the opposition that you've met and how this has impacted you?
I think I've probably had very similar experiences to anyone that sort of takes this subject on. Any political criticism at all that is mounted of initially the LGBT lobby, and then as that lobby began to accumulate more and more alphabets on it, the TQ and all the pluses, it has successfully positioned itself as a wonderful civil rights movement that no one in their right mind could possibly have any objections to. Well, I think the audience of this program has plenty of objections to what is being said and done in the name of trans activism. To answer your question, I'd like to make the point that even much earlier than when trans activism more or less took over that particular subject, it was still really difficult politically to criticise that particular group. If, for example, you were not particularly enamoured of some of the things that were displayed in, for example, Sydney Mardi Gras, I'm thinking here back in the 90s, when LGB was basically being used to mainstream the notion of sadomasochism. And I was absolutely appalled at the time by that for what I hope are obvious reasons. And when I brought it up with people, women who considered themselves to be feminists, you know, I got such negative reactions, and all sorts of people just said, oh no, I was absolutely terrible and how could I possibly say that? And I felt as though I'd gone down some weird rabbit hole like Alice in Wonderland, or to be more accurate, perhaps I'd gone through the looking glass and everything was arse about. So you can expect to lose friends. You can expect to be told that you're crazy. You can expect to be told that you're right wing. So I guess what I'm getting at here is this has been going on for a long time, not just recently when the T and the Q plus were sort of added in. I guess that's the way it's affected me. You sort of couldn't take me anywhere. I'd arc up about the subject, and I found that what happened is I became very estranged from having anything really much to do with matters gay, because I was so deeply disappointed and disgusted with that whole dialogue as it was at the time, and very heavily promoted in the gay press, and just this big sacred cow that you weren't allowed to criticise. It was absolutely bizarre. And that at the time was a mere storm in a teacup. That was just confined really to the gay world, and now it's gone metastatic and it's absolutely blooming everywhere.
Is there an area of activity where you focus your efforts to resist gender identity, and where has that taken you?
Most definitely. Following on from my previous remarks, I have a monumental bee in my bonnet about the way in which LGB plus the alphabet soup has been diverted into a full spectrum attack upon women and girls' rights everywhere. And so help me, also increasingly as a stalking horse for the sexualisation of children. It absolutely appalls me to have to say that, but it is so much a part now of this particular narrative, that you can have gay children, that children can know when they're 3 or 4 that they're truly, truly somehow transgender. This is absolutely appalling. And it's coming in under the auspices of LGB. Well, this L says, absolutely not in my name. Yeah. Before I go any further, I'd just like to give a very deep and sincere thank you to other straight feminists, other straight sisters, other straight women who have defended lesbians who at the present moment are under dreadful attack. As you noted in my bio, I determined that I was gay when I was a teenager up in North Queensland in the 1970s. And it simply didn't occur to me that there could be any more in Australia. The thought didn't enter my head. I thought there might be some in New York. And when I grew up and left home, I could save up and I could go there. Now, I think it was about 2 years ago, the Queensland government, I can't think what body that it was under, but this was an official Queensland government initiative. They had something, I think it was a Lesbian Day of Visibility or maybe a Lesbian Week of Visibility. Now, the spokesperson for that particular piece of propaganda was a biological male. This is the very, very measure of our degradation and our erasure. And I would just like to say that I believe that first and foremost, lesbians belong to the sex class women. And there is no legitimate demand that any lesbian could make of society that would harm the interests of other women and vice versa. But the view of female sexuality that's promoted under the auspices of queer and, you know, gender transformation and all sorts of other things is something that is intensely harmful to women at the moment. So how in heaven's name, in the name of progressive politics, did we get from there might be some in New York, to here? Oh, it's all terribly accepted, but it's actually about men. I mean, the mind simply boggles, okay? I'll get back to, I diverted to thank my straight sisters and to explain why I thought lesbians politically, our interests absolutely align with those of all other women. You know, not with anything that the men happen to be doing. Some men are very good on this subject, but unfortunately, alas, many are not. So our interests lie with women. And I call upon all my fellow lesbians to absolutely recommit to affiliation and political cooperation with all our wonderful straight sisters and our wonderful mums out there that are spearheading opposition to transgender ideology at the moment. We have to join hands with them, yeah? So I believe that lesbians almost have an obligation to speak up for all women against what is being said and done in our name, even if we ourselves had absolutely nothing to do with it. You will note that earlier I said that LGB had been diverted rather than hijacked by all the TQ+. I say this because LGB has always had a certain amount of housekeeping of its own to do, and the rainbow flag has been an accident waiting to happen culturally because of its association with consumerism and generally libertarian unbridled behaviour. It started out as a demand for legitimate human rights for gay people, for homosexuality to be decriminalised, for violence against us, both the men and the women, to be taken seriously, for young gay people to be left to their own devices to grow up without persecution. That was what the gay movement originally started out as. And as time went on, a whole lot of other associations began to be added to it. So what this led to, I believe, was generally on the part of the public, a lot of support for gay rights that perhaps wasn't really support. What do I mean by that? I call it perv by proxy. Pretty well anyone can take a literal or metaphorical walk on the wild side in the rainbow tourist destination. They can vomit and litter and worse in the main drag, and then clear out, leaving the ratepayers to clean up the mess and pick up the tab. So I'm trying to divorce the concept of LGBT rights as civil rights from all the accretions of excessive behaviour, of consumerism, of mindless promiscuity and things like that, that have kind of accreted to it. And I would like to give encouragement to other people, especially to feminists, to not feel afraid that there is something anti-gay about criticising those negative aspects that have come into the movement and which have now been completely and utterly taken over by T and Q and various other forms of fetish. Okay. So I'm going to read out here. LGB has always been a sitting duck for appropriation by perv because there was never any real profound objection to perv on the part, unfortunately, of many of the men who see unbridled access to all and any whole as their birthright, supported then as now by their admiring ladies auxiliary, both straight and lesbian. So I am a grown-up and I want the rainbow given back to children, as well as the mermaids and the unicorns. I believe that its LGB use was always juvenile and dubious, and regarding all matters LGB, we need a few grown-ups in the room. So what I shall do now is read out something that I took off the internet that was written by a gay man. And I read this out to you to give you a perspective from a gay man who is basically saying something very similar to me, to illustrate that gay people in general are not necessarily inherently all for the sort of brainless libertarianism that is popularly associated with LGBTQ+. This man made me aware of the sexualisation of gay children because he got on the internet and he was very keen to say that there is no such thing as a gay child. And it just sort of hit me. I thought, of course there's no such thing as a gay child. There are gay teenagers because that is when you become a mature sexual being and begin to think about these things. So we have a whole narrative about, gay children, trans children. It's appalling. This is what John has to say. Remind me, Janet, if I'm running out of time, please. I'm afraid that was always where pride was going to end up. It could never have been about inalienable rights for long. Why are some people surprised that a movement about pride inherently attracts narcissists, fetishists, perverts, and creeps, when it is precisely that environment that allows them to publicly express their pride at being as effed up as they are. Every opportunity is a chance for them to push society's limits and boundaries that little bit more. The trans garbage, I'm quoting, was inevitable. Yet, when you raise the point with some same-sex attracted people who claim never to have had anything to do with it, they will rush in to defend it and cry homophobia. Are people really so blind as to how indoctrinated they are by this shite? Maddening. You would think that its enablers would realise what they've done and contributed to by now, but no. So this man feels as frustrated as I do. In the meantime, he continues, actual gay people who simply want to have normal lives are still being persecuted in backwards societies. I guess they need pride, right? Oh wait, silly me. Pride and the rainbow flag ideology are what extremist governments conflate gay people with, especially when they talk of the harm it does to children. Can you effing blame them? I can't. Thank you, John.
What are the next steps for you, Anne? And do you have any suggestions for the attendees?
The first suggestion that I would have for the attendees is that our immediate political problem is to halt or reverse gender self-ID in whatever country and in whatever stage it has gotten to, because this is the primary instrument of the destruction of women and girls' rights. So that's the big one, the absolute number one. I think everything else comes second to that. And it is very much a tactic for women in each country to consider what measures they need to take or be forced to take to bring that about. Now, that leads me to the next point, that just talk to this meeting in very general terms about a couple of things that left-wing women tend to trip up on a little bit in the current climate in which we find ourselves, because we just simply can't get heard anywhere. We can't get published anywhere. We lose our bank accounts, for goodness sake. And then if we appear in the Daily Telegraph or the Daily Mail or something, up goes the cry of, oh, you're right wing, you're somehow in league with the political right. And I do feel that there is a tendency amongst people on the left to get perhaps a little bit on the wrong foot about this, to kind of retreat and say, oh God, what can we say about that? Well, this is what I reckon. First of all, look who's doing the talking. Look at who's flinging the accusation about. I think that 9 times out of 10, you will find that it is the pseudo-left, from liberal progressives to most of, unfortunately, the socialist groups. These people have lost all moral legitimacy to call us anything whatsoever, when they are the ones clamouring all over every form of media, both traditional and social, for us to simply shut up. So the thing that we would have to worry about is, are we in fact being drawn into being, well, not quite being right-wing, but in somehow facilitating right-wing agendas by appearing with groups to speak or to put our point of view across, where we may not really agree with them about very much else particularly. I don't think this is anything to get defensive about really, or go on the back foot. The main thing is that we preserve the integrity of our feminist message and we don't water our message down to pander to the prejudices of or to gain approval from those groups that we're addressing. And I think if we do it like that, we're doing a good thing, and it is something that each individual woman and group will have to make their own choice from their own personal discretion as to how they think it will pan out. But accusations that are wildly flung at us, don't give them the time of day. End of. If a woman who is sweet reason personified, and I'm thinking here of Helen Joyce, can be called on social media all sorts of Nazi with little clips and snips out of something she said, taken completely out of context, I don't think we really need to worry about what we're called, because we're going to be called it anyway. And let's please not call one another that if perhaps at times we disagree. How do we talk to the non-converted? I think that left-wing people, and this can happen to anybody, pardon me, including radical feminists, we get a little bit in our own echo chamber. And what we have to do, and this fits in with what I said earlier about talking in whatever venue to whomsoever will listen. We have to talk to the non-converted. And here's a couple of ways that we can do it. In Australian English, we have a marvellous vernacular that lends itself beautifully to straight talking and to humour. Let's use it. Let's avoid jargon. Let's present our ideas in a format that our audience can understand and which makes them think. I'll give a little example here. Up my way, Queensland, I often, especially in the past, used to have people say to me, oh, Aboriginals, oh, they get this and they get that. They get this special program, they get this special handout. And these are often people that don't have much themselves and they're feeling a little bit put out. You're going to get nowhere if you hop up and down and yell racist at people like that. What I'm fond of saying to them is, here, I've got a magic wand. I'm going to wave that magic wand and I'm going to turn you into one. You can be a black right now, and you too can enjoy all the special privileges that they have. Now, what do you reckon? You're going to take me up on it? And you would be surprised at the thoughtful looks that actually come over people's faces when the idea of them being racist is presented to them in a completely different way. I'll give another example here with the environment. Greens, sadly, and matters green seem to have gotten in the culture wars, particularly here in Australia, all sorts of a bad name. People just draw the shutters down when you talk about the environment, you want to talk about sustainability. Here's another way to go about it. There is nothing radical about environmentalism in some ways. It's as conservative as it gets. Waste not, want not. Who doesn't understand that? Take that as your departure, your point of departure, to talk about environmentalism and to talk about how monumentally wasteful our current system is. And then I'm fond of saying to people, if we destroy the glories of creation and there's nothing left, what is there left for those that come after us? What is there left for the next generation? And then you start dragging jobs into it. Where are the jobs of the future for our children if we find that we can no longer be wasteful of the world's resources? I haven't mentioned a single ism. I haven't mentioned Greens. I haven't mentioned sustainability. I haven't mentioned a single buzzword that's going to set people off. So I just thought I'd do this a bit, you know. all my mob, I know a lot of Hansonites, let's just put it this way. I do. I come from a working class background. Excellent people in many ways very right wing, but they'd also give you the shirt off their back. So let's get a little bit outside our sometimes prejudiced echo chambers and take the word out there to the people. Trust in the decency and common sense of ordinary people, and do prepare to be quite often pleasantly surprised.